Hello, everyone. If you're prepping for competitive exams, you know there are certain Supreme Court judgments that are just non-negotiable. You have to know them. And the Navtej Singh Johar verdict, the one that dealt with Section 377, is absolutely at the top of that list. So today we're going to decode it. We'll break down exactly what the court said, why they said it, and what it all means for the Constitution.
Right from the very beginning, the judgment hits you with this incredibly powerful line. This isn't just some dry legal jargon, right? This quote signals that the case, at its very heart, is about the fundamental human need to be who you are. The court is setting the stage, basically saying that to deny someone their identity isn't just an inconvenience, it's a kind of death.
So here is our game plan. First, we'll look at where this law even came from. Then we'll see how it was tested against our fundamental rights. We'll unpack a really key concept, constitutional morality. Then we'll get to the verdict itself. And finally, we'll wrap up with the key takeaways that you're going to need for your exams.
Okay, first things first. Before we can understand why the Supreme Court made the decision it did, we really need to get to grips with the law itself. I mean, where did it come from? And what did it actually say?
So this law dates all the way back to 1860. And the really problematic part, the phrase that caused all the trouble, is against the order of nature. The crazy thing is, the law never actually defined what that meant. This vagueness, which was basically a leftover from old Victorian ideas, turned the law into a tool that was used to target and persecute the LGBT community for decades.
Now, the legal journey to this verdict was a total roller coaster. As you can see, back in 2009, the Delhi High Court made a huge progressive step forward. But then, just 4 years later, the Supreme Court reversed that decision in the Suresh Kumar Koushal case. The real game changer, the turning point, came in 2017 with the Puttaswamy judgment. A massive 9-judge bench declared that the right to privacy is a fundamental right. And that right there provided the constitutional firepower to challenge Section 377 all over again, leading straight to the 2018 verdict we're talking about today.
All right, this brings us to the absolute core of the court's reasoning. You can think of it like this. The judges put Section 377 on trial. They tested it against what's often called the golden trinity of our fundamental rights, Articles 14, 19, and 21. Let's see how this old law held up.
First up is Article 14, which is all about equality before the law. So, the big question for the court was simple. Does this law treat every citizen equally, or does it unfairly target and discriminate against a specific group of people?
And the court's answer was a resounding no. It found that this whole classification of acts as natural or unnatural was completely arbitrary. There was no logic to it. And because this arbitrary line unfairly singled out the LGBT community, the court declared the law manifestly arbitrary and a clear violation of the right to equality.
Next, the court moved on to Article 21. Now, this right is about so much more than just being alive. It's about the right to live a full life, a life with dignity, with autonomy, with privacy. So how did a law from the 1800s fare against this modern, expansive idea of what it means to live?
This is where that Puttaswamy privacy judgment became so important. The court drew a direct line, saying that your sexual orientation is a natural part of your identity, and your identity is protected by your right to privacy. So by criminalizing that identity, Section 377 was forcing people to live in fear, to hide who they are. And that, the court said, is a deep violation of their right to a life with dignity under Article 21.
And finally, we come to Article 19, the freedom of speech and expression. You know, you might just think this is about what you say, but the court sees it as something much bigger. It's about expressing your identity, your choices, your very self.
Here, the court used a term you should definitely remember for your exams, a chilling effect. What this means is that even if the law wasn't being used against you every single day, just having it on the books was enough to silence people. It created this climate of fear that stopped people from being open about who they are or who they love. This forced invisibility was a clear violation of their freedom of expression.
So you might be wondering, how did the court arrive at all these conclusions? Well, it relied on a very powerful guiding principle, and this is something you absolutely need to know, the idea of constitutional morality.
This is such a critical distinction. Think of social morality as just popular opinion, what the majority of people might think is right or wrong at any given time. But constitutional morality, that's based on the timeless values written into our Constitution: liberty, equality, dignity. The court made it crystal clear that its job isn't to enforce what's popular, but to uphold the Constitution, especially when it means protecting a minority from the majority. And wow, this quote just says it all.
The court is saying in no uncertain terms that fundamental rights cannot be sacrificed just because society might disapprove. In a country governed by the rule of law, the Constitution's values have to win every single time.
So, after putting the law through all these tests, what was the final decision? Let's get into a really clear breakdown of the verdict. This is super important for making sure your exam answers are precise.
The court was very specific. What it did was decriminalize consensual sexual acts between adults in private. But it's just as important to know what it didn't change. Section 377 still applies to non-consensual acts, anything involving minors, and bestiality. The court was like a surgeon, carefully removing the part that was unconstitutional while leaving all the necessary protections in place.
And one last crucial point here. The court officially and explicitly overruled its own earlier judgment from 2013, the Suresh Kumar case. It basically said we were wrong then and cleared the way for this new, correct interpretation. All right, let's pull this all together. Think of this next part as your ultimate revision list, the high-yield concepts from this judgment that you'll definitely want to have at your fingertips for any exam.
Okay, here are the 5 big ideas. 1. Constitutional morality always trumps social morality. 2. The idea of transformative constitutionalism, that our Constitution is a living tool for social change. 3. Sexual orientation is a core part of your right to privacy. 4. The ban on discrimination based on sex also covers sexual orientation. And 5. The court completely shut down the argument that you can deny rights to a group just because they're a minuscule fraction of the population. Rights are for everyone, period.
And that brings us to our final thought. This whole judgment was driven by an idea called transformational constitutionalism. This belief that the Constitution isn't just a dusty old rule book, but a powerful instrument to fix historical injustices.